Assalamu everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Mushfiq, and I am your host Mushfiq Munjir. Welcome to this podcast, where we dive into the world of books and bring you all the latest and most popular information before you even pick up a book. Join here as I review and summarize the most talked about books, giving you a sneak peek into their storylines and characters. Whether you're an avid reader or just looking for your next great read, this podcast has something for everyone. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and get ready to discover your next favorite book with me. A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James is a sprawling, ambitious novel that weaves together multiple perspectives and voices to tell the story of Jamaica's turbulent history from the 1970s to the 1990s. The book revolves around the attempted assassination of Bob Marley in 1976 and its far-reaching consequences. Narrated by a diverse cast of characters, including gang members, CIA operatives, journalists, and politicians, the novel explores themes of power, violence, corruption, and identity. It delves into the social and political complexities of Jamaica, including the rise of the drug trade, the influence of American politics, and the struggles of the marginalized. Through its vivid prose and intricate storytelling, A Brief History of 7 Killings offers a gripping portrait of a nation in flux, capturing the raw energy and cultural richness of Jamaica while also shedding light on its darker aspects. It is a challenging but rewarding read that leaves a lasting impression on its readers. The story begins with the ghost of Sir Arthur George Jennings, who sets the stage for the tumultuous events that follow. The novel then dives into the gritty reality of 1970s Kingston, where violence and political turmoil reign. Characters like the young gang member Bam Bam and the ambitious Don Popolo illustrate the harsh life in the ghettos and the intertwining of music, drugs, and politics. As the novel progresses, the action shifts to New York City during the crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s, highlighting the international impact of the Jamaican gangs. The narrative concludes in the 1990s, presenting a changed Jamaica but still grappling with the legacies of its violent past. Marlon James weaves a rich tapestry of voices and perspectives, creating a vivid portrayal of Jamaica's history and its far-reaching consequences. The novel is not only a story of 7 killings, but also a profound examination of power, identity, and survival. A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James is indeed based on real events. The novel explores the attempted assassination of Bob Marley in Jamaica in 1976 and its aftermath, including the political violence and the involvement of the CIA in Jamaican politics during that time. While the narrative includes fictional elements and characters, it is deeply rooted in actual historical incidents and figures from Jamaica's past. James has used a variety of different points of view throughout this novel. He has accomplished to use all of these different characters and stay true to his writing style. Some seemed more beneficial to the story compared to others. However, some gave the reader to gain more information from a different angle. Usually when an author is writing from different point of views, the story can become hard to follow or the characters lose their identities. I don't know how James has managed it, but the characters stay interesting and lively throughout. Each character gains a backstory and a memory within the novel, making every character a valued asset. Some of the characters have their lone chapters at different key points of the book. A good example of this is with Nina Burgess, who, despite being a side character, has an interesting backstory with Popolo and her involvement with the CIA. The characters develop greatly as the story progresses. The contrasting time periods show how the event has affected all of the characters, assisting in making this a very memorable story. A Brief History of 7 Killings is a brilliant novel because it provides a window to the shattered dreams of Jamaican people in the late 20th century. It is raw, comical, tragic, and at times hopeful. By providing an oral history of an era marked by poverty, drugs, and war, James allows the voice of the people to be heard. He is able to illustrate a picture of a ruined island where the public's best hope of peace was, maybe one day to rain fall forever and no more sun stop we. The most poignant part of this story is the epilogue that describes the disillusionment of the youth who believed that Bob Marley was shot, but him still alive as long as them songs alive. It's a lucky ting Rika, really. The novel is about a failed assassination attempt on Bob Marley in the late 1970s. It focuses on how power and corruption destroyed the dreams of the new generation of idealists in Jamaica. The invincibility of Joseph "Josie" Wales illustrates the ultimate power, so much so he can survive an assassination attempt that many people believe is fated to succeed. This event, along with the Green Bay Massacre, demonstrates that political violence was a virus devouring the country. The resolve of the CIA agent makes the point that they will not tolerate any form of government that could threaten America in its own backyard. The CIA went after the Third World Socialist government, and thus they went after Bob Marley. There are many drug crime stories on the way, such as the story of Bam Bam, who becomes a cocaine foreman, and Todd the Chicagoan. Together they illustrate the microcosm of Jamaican drug links onto the macrocosm. This is Todd's description of tap lining. "You know what de tap a class do? Tap a cline inside de tap a cline. How you mean, what dat? It's just a little coke inside de cane, man." The New York Times review praised James' qualified and recognized beyond tropes and stereotypes in his character portrayal and his skill in writing across genres. Kakutani, on the other hand, stated, "It's a tour de force of voice and structure, a sprawling effort that achieves a kind of orality as a written phenomenon. Mr. James's novel holds the reader in a paradoxical thrall of tautness and expansiveness. The narrative pushes relentlessly forward with the propulsive force of a 1970s reggae classic, and the very roughness of it, the slang and the violence, the dense mesh of characters and their competing agendas, serves as a kind of buffer to the great and seemingly boundless scope of his project." This review was one of 2 very large U.S. reviews and demonstrates the acclaim and regard for the work's depth and complexity. Lenny Henry also filmed a 2-part BBC interview with James at his home and in Jamaica about the novel, which aired in February 2015. The A Brief History of 7 Killings received critical acclaim after it was published. The New York Times and The Telegraph named it one of the best books of 2014. The Guardian and The New York Times both published reviews of the book. Reviewing for The New York Times, Michiko Kakutani says, "It's like a Tarantino remake of The Harder They Come, but with a soundtrack by Bob Marley and a script by Oliver Stone. Epic in every sense of that word. Sweeping, mythic, over the top, colossal and dizzyingly complex. It's also brilliant in its rendering of a time and a place, from the grimy crack houses of Crown Heights to the verdant bourgeoisie of Jamaica." 2 chapters in the novel that give a vivid reminder of ghetto conflict are Nina Burgess and her bona fide incident and Bam Bam. Mr. Brown's connection and reliance on Josie Wales has kept the singer's family relatively safe from the explosive violence that has ensued in the streets, whereas an alliance with Shada Sheriff would prove ill-fated. Using a couple of 6-packs and a bottle of rum as a bribe, Josie hires the services of Bam Bam's gang to take care of some business and eliminate a potential threat to his music. That very same night, a drunken Bam Bam storms the singer's residence looking for Josie, but due to his inebriated state, he believes that the shootout has occurred as nothing more than a nightmare. He laughs it off while a terrorized Nina takes note of telling Papa Lo. This incident has her too frightened to speak about testing blood for cancer in a herbal remedy. This event would signify the end of a relatively peaceful alliance for Singer and another change in power for the upper ghetto classes. The final chapter of A Brief History of 7 Killings is a postscript which gives a glimpse of how things have changed after the failed assassination attempt and the ripple effect it has had on characters throughout the book. The key idea from this chapter is the change in power. Throughout the novel, the CIA and the JLP's relationship is erratic. At times they are mutual allies and other times they are trying to covertly dismantle each other. By using menial tasks to get the job done, Papa Lo is suggested to kill 2 young impoverished JLP supporters, and in return, Bruno Ruff trade kills a suspect of the democratic socialism movement in Kingston. Despite the opposing political views and actions of these alliances, none had a lasting effect as a shift in power would cause the intervention of U.S. military and police powers enforcing their way on others. This thinly veils an attempt by the real CIA to subvert nationalistic regimes and has disastrous results. Papa Lo makes mention of being worried about what would happen if the socialists were to take power, which conflict in middle to lower-class social and political issues has been a subtext to the central gang conflict throughout the book. This all culminates in the attempted assassination of the singer at the Smile Jamaica concert in support of the peace movement. This event surfaces in the novel, particularly in the closing chapters, as Jamaica's darkest hour. This event was the climax in Jamaica's error, the true, nearly fatal blow to the nation's corrupt decade and a half. The singer postpones his oration until the nation could find a compromise leading to a less hectic climate. This symbolizes reggae music itself, which has only risen in popularity in days marking unity and has declined in Jamaica's most destructive times. The Hughes narcotic investigation of 1976, sponsored by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency and Drug Enforcement Agency, investigates how Jamaica had become the single greatest drugs depot in the Caribbean. At this time, both cocaine and marijuana had become main cash crops. This is symbolic of Jamaica's continued destruction since independence. Throughout the ruling of both political parties, Jamaica was forced to solve their economic crisis through revenue derived from drugs and firearms, a decision that has only prolonged the nation's demise. Throughout the novel, there are endless practices of symbolism and imagery. The entire novel is centered around the attempted assassination of Bob Marley. Marley is said to have barely escaped the shooting on his life and shortly thereafter left the country, without returning until 2 years later for a free concert. He left and never returned to Jamaica. This assassination is an altered version of what actually happened. Marlon James is implying that the near destruction of Jamaica's peace is what caused Marley to go into exile. During this period, James says that the people of Jamaica felt as if they were hostages to their own leader. The title, A Brief History of 7 Killings, is a very symbolic title. The actions of the novel span over a couple of decades, and there are quite a few murders in the novel. It seems that the author is trying to literally sum up that time frame and the murders through this brief history. It is common knowledge that a history involving as many deaths as this novel will be quite long, and the fact that it is a brief history is symbolic of the fact that these events involving Jamaica and America are not common knowledge. The history is a brief one. Marley himself was a significant figure in the Jamaica of the 1970s, and this is reflected in what would then be a failed assassination attempt on his life. This assassination attempt is a key part of the novel and is, in fact, the event that triggers the chain of events that follow. James uses the settings that Bob Marley used to record the album Catch a Fire as a backdrop for some of the scenes throughout the book. This, in a way, bridges the reality of what was Jamaica in 1976 with the fiction of the novel's characters. Although Marley's character is only briefly mentioned in the novel, it serves as a significant point as what James calls the beginning of the end of the old Jamaica. The novel ends at the time of the attempted assassination alone, hence this is significant of the shift from taking from historical context to fiction. The brief history of 7 killings is based on the real-life events that took place in December 1976. This was a particularly violent time in Jamaican history, as is reflected in the portrayal of 7 killings. Taking into consideration bands of armed gangs riding around and political warfare, it was a tough time to live for the citizens of both Jamaica and the fictional characters portrayed in the book. James uses a brief history of 7 killings to exhibit the untold side of Jamaican history and illustrate what life was like for those living in the poverty-stricken Kingston. Although the novel is a fictional piece, it serves as a unique documentation of the social and political occurrences in Jamaica during this time. James has revealed that he intentionally selected this time frame due to the censored history behind it. This act of shifting between fiction and reality is also enforced by the use of real-life characters such as Sir Alexander Bustamante, Michael Manley, and Bob Marley. I also found the focus on authorial intentions a little peculiar. But reader response criticism is a very strange form of criticism because it seems to focus on making a distinction between the reading of a novel and the reading of its literary excellence. Reader response critics generally accept the view that either a literary work is the production of a single person who is an author or a series of similar works written over time by a group of authors identified with each other. But the general view is that the author is essentially irrelevant to any part of the story which is not explicitly written down in the novel. Whether the author's worldview, the zeitgeist at the time of writing, are relevant are hotly contested issues within literary criticism. But a reader response critic generally views any attempt to identify these elements as an attempt to gain insight into the actual elements outside the story that influenced a written work. Whether these things are what an author intended to put into a novel or not is often an impossible question to answer. But the distinction between the author's intended meanings, messages, symbolisms, etc., and the intentions of constructing an effective written story are what reader response critics attempt to tease out of an analysis of a work. The Maroons' achievement of immunity from the Jamaican militia's active seeking of their outright destruction was one of their most significant achievements in the quest for the preservation of their autonomy. They used it as a judicial and oral weapon in the defense of their culturally specific traditional rights and privileges. Also, it should be noted that the Maroons had a similar military peace with the British as they did with the Spanish, and it was this environment which helped the Spanish to more readily end hostilities with the British and vacate Jamaica in 1670. The Maroons' evidence of a continued payment of goods as land tax to the British government to prevent their removal from the land before the 7-Year War, and their retention of receipt of the land which was previously treaties with the Spanish after the war, serve as evidence that they were very astute in using their military invincibility as a tool in the acquisition of concessions which would preserve and improve their autonomy. How exactly and to what extent did the Maroons alter the basic structure and the ruling ideology of Jamaican society prior to its independence from Britain in 1962? The author of 19th Century Jamaica conveys the impression that, given the small size of their communities, the Maroons' impact was minimal. This impression of historical insignificance is somewhat modified by the findings of his essay, which reveals the existence of imprint land settlements and a new class formation in 19th century Jamaica. As mentioned earlier, this new development in class stratification was a direct result of the semi-autonomous nature of the Maroon communities. If they had not been granted such privilege, it is likely that class formation in the general Jamaican society at that time would have affected the Maroons' classes themselves far more than it did. Silver's escape to Canada and the subsequent joining of his family is probably the best outcome of any of the characters in the book. This is not due to necessarily finding something better, which might have applied to Mal, but purely in terms of him finding a state that is peaceful and neutral and being left alone by the forces that would seek to exploit him. The status quo realizes that Jamaica isn't economically beneficial for American or European countries, in that it's too political and any puppet leader would have too great a threat to his power due to the want of power. Foreign interference has traditionally resulted in using the various political leaders as pawns in Cold War politics. Papa Doc was manipulated to keep Haiti from going socialist in the U.S. interests in the Duvalier regime. The result of this is often a desire to rid the country of politicians that can no longer be easily controlled. Consequently, a price is put on the heads of those that were brought to power, and with new laborers needed in the form of flows, it only becomes harder for Jamaica to survive. The survivors of the violence in A Brief History of 7 Killings reach this area of peace by escaping to the USA. Most of the men from the ghetto areas of Jamaica simply swap one set of problems for another. We see how they're used to form a political counterbalance to various oppositional groups, not always consciously, or to be sought out if and when they're required. Often they're swapped in a more direct way. Josie is eventually used as a CIA informer in the ghetto to keep the JLP from gaining more power. He's paid generous amounts of money and ensures that the US can manipulate his escape to freedom and continue to finance his extravagant lifestyle. The onslaught of foreign policy continues from external superpowers. The CIA influence is rife in Jamaica, and the text illustrates how CIA intervention in Jamaica between 73 and 80 was even greater than that of the British Empire between 62 and 69. A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James incorporates several real-life events and figures into its narrative. Here are some of the key historical elements depicted in the novel. Political violence in Jamaica. The novel portrays the politically motivated violence between gangs associated with the Jamaica Labour Party, JLP, and the People's National Party, PNP, particularly in the West Kingston neighborhoods of Tivoli Gardens and Matthews Lane. Involvement of the CIA. The story touches on the CIA's involvement in Jamaican politics during the 1970s, reflecting the geopolitical tensions of the Cold War era. The Crack Wars. The novel extends into the 1980s, chronicling the spread of crack cocaine in New York City and Miami, and the connections between Jamaican gangs and the Colombian Medellin drug cartel. Anti-Castro Cubans. The influence of anti-Castro Cubans on Jamaica is another aspect of the historical backdrop within the novel. These events are woven into the fabric of the story, providing a rich and authentic context to the fictional narrative. The characters and their actions, while part of the novel's fictional world, are deeply intertwined with these real historical events and settings. Marlon James employs a variety of narrative techniques in A Brief History of 7 Killings to depict the events and provide a multifaceted perspective. Here are some of the key methods he uses. Polyvocal narration. The novel features a wide range of voices, with over 75 characters providing their viewpoints. This polyphony allows for a rich exploration of the events from multiple angles. Nonlinear narrative. The story is not told in chronological order, which reflects the complex nature of history and memory. This technique also helps to build suspense and engage the reader in piecing together the narrative. Stream of consciousness. Some sections of the book use a stream of consciousness style, giving readers direct access to a character's thoughts and emotions, which adds depth to the characters and their experiences. Use of multiple dialects. James uses various dialects and registers of English, which not only authenticates the voices of the characters but also highlights the cultural and social diversity of Jamaica. These narrative strategies work together to create a vivid and immersive experience, allowing readers to understand the complexity of the events and the impact they had on the individuals involved. The use of different perspectives in A Brief History of 7 Killings enhances the reader's understanding in several ways. Depth of insight. By presenting the story through various characters, readers gain a deeper understanding of the events and their implications from multiple social, political, and personal viewpoints. Cultural authenticity. The diverse perspectives bring authenticity to the cultural setting of the novel, allowing readers to experience the rich tapestry of Jamaican life and dialects. Complexity of themes. The novel tackles complex themes such as power, corruption, and identity. The multiplicity of voices allows these themes to be explored in a nuanced and comprehensive manner. Emotional engagement. Different perspectives invite readers to empathize with a range of characters, each with their own motivations and backgrounds, creating a more emotionally engaging narrative. Narrative reliability. With multiple narrators, readers are encouraged to question the reliability of each perspective, which adds a layer of critical thinking to the reading experience. Overall, the polyvocal approach provides a more rounded and intricate understanding of the historical events and their impact on individuals and society. In A Brief History of 7 Killings, several characters offer unique and compelling perspectives that stand out. Nina Burgess. Initially known as Dorcas Palmer, her perspective is particularly striking as she undergoes a significant transformation throughout the novel. Her journey from a frightened witness to the assassination attempt to someone who adopts multiple identities for survival provides a profound look into the themes of identity and reinvention. Josie Wales. As one of the most feared gang leaders in Kingston, his perspective offers insight into the violent political underbelly of Jamaica in the 1970s. His ruthless ambition and complex relationship with power make his viewpoint both intriguing and unsettling. Alex Pierce. The American journalist's perspective stands out as it provides an outsider's view of the events in Jamaica. His investigations into the attempted assassination and the political climate add a layer of international intrigue to the narrative. Sir Arthur George Jennings. The ghost of the former politician offers a posthumous reflection on the events, adding a supernatural element to the story and a unique commentary on the historical and political context. These characters, among others, contribute significantly to the novel's rich tapestry of voices, each adding depth and dimension to the reader's understanding of the story's complex events and themes. In A Brief History of 7 Killings, Marlon James takes readers on an unforgettable journey through the turbulent streets of Jamaica, weaving together a tapestry of voices and perspectives to illuminate the country's complex history. From the attempted assassination of Bob Marley to the rise of drug gangs and the influence of foreign powers, James explores themes of power, violence, and identity with unflinching honesty and breathtaking prose. As the story unfolds through the eyes of its diverse cast of characters, readers are drawn into a world where the lines between good and evil blur, and where survival often comes at a steep price. Yet amidst the chaos and bloodshed, there are moments of beauty and humanity that shine through, reminding us of the resilience of the human spirit even in the darkest of times. With its bold storytelling and richly drawn characters, A Brief History of 7 Killings is a masterful work that leaves a profound impact on its readers. It is a testament to the power of literature to illuminate the hidden corners of history and to capture the essence of a nation in flux. As the final pages turn, readers are left with a deep sense of both awe and introspection, knowing that they have experienced something truly extraordinary.